It all began for me with this passage. That was why I was in that strange museum round the back of the Louvre. Not many people go there anymore. It had a vogue when ancient Egypt, after Napoleon, became a big thing. And all the French went out to Egypt, and they came back, and they brought back so many artifacts, they had no one to do with them. And they put them hodgepodge and hegger-megger in all sorts of funny places, including this old museum loosely attached to the Louvre, but down in the basement, deep down. Hard to find actually now. Isis saith, I have come to protect unto thee. I waft unto thee the air of thy nostrils, and the north wind that cometh forth from the goddess Tem into thy nose. I make whole thy windpipes. These are the texts, so that you know where they are, of the funeral. For the funeral chamber, the spells to revive a soul. I remember, I heard, I wasn't sure from where, that it was this museum that had all the early and most complete papyri, piled any old how, before people understood them, about the smells by which the Egyptians raised the dead. Well, as I had always had a consuming interest in things Egyptian, and even more their afterlife and their ghosts, it seemed to me to be sensible to go. And I was reading at the time, in hieroglyphs, but also in translation, the Book of the Dead. And I knew that deep somewhere in that museum, there were all sorts of treasures left over from the days of the restoration of the monarchy, when Egypt went out of vogue. Well, I have to say, if you ever get a chance, do go to that museum. You might have to make a fuss to get in. It's not always easy. And if your French isn't good, you have no hope. It was remarkable. All sorts of artifacts were piled up everywhere. Mummies, inscriptions, ruined tombs. From the days of the Valley of the Kings, you could just walk down and see what you wanted. I remember that I went further into the museum, and they were strange. There were artifacts, not just from Egypt, but from Nut and Nuba. Old, funny pyramids that showed both cultures, whose writing had evolved somewhat. It was when I was right at the end of the rooms that I first saw him. He was a strange, wizened man. His face was dark, and his eyes haunted. And what was most funny was he was like one of the inscriptions, like one of the ways the Egyptians used to draw themselves, all hollow-cheeked and bright-eyed, with a plaited beard. It was strange to see. Very strange. Well, you know how it is with scholarship. You start to turn over pages. I'm still not very good at reading hieroglyphs, and I was puzzling through exactly what they were saying as the light failed. Now, they don't lock up that museum till very late. And as chance would have it, I was working in a recess, and I'm afraid I must have nodded off, because when I woke up, the museum was utterly dark. There was nobody there. Really nobody. I stretched and I looked at my scripts. It was totally dark. I hadn't a torch on me. Well, I got up feeling the way I could, and I pulled back the curtain, and I wondered, what am I going to do? I mean, being stuck in a museum is a wonderful, wonderful gift. But if you have no light, you can't do anything. And then suddenly I saw coming up the stairs a glimmer, made not even by torch, but some sort of rushlight, held against the skin. And that man, the warden came in. I think that was what he was. He was certainly dressed formally, holding in his hand a light, a rushlight that could have come out of ancient Egypt. And as I watched, he was bending over some of the more obscure cases. I'd been puzzling over what they meant. Inscriptions about mummies that did not die, and life beyond life, and an allusion to a princess of the Nubian dynasties. I knew about them. An offshoot of the second major period of Egypt. One of their dynasties had ended up pharaohs of Nubia, and then there'd been an act of rebellion or something, and the Nubian kingdom had been destroyed by their northern, more military neighbours. It would have been fun. That was what was made some of these artefacts so very strange. I mean, nobody else had ever found a Nubian mummy, but there it was. And when he read, he grew very excited. And I saw he was opening up the case, and he was taking out rings, crystal rings, and he was looking at them, holding them against his rushlight. And I saw that his rushlight would indeed pass a strange kind of glow through them, sometimes making them glow almost red. And then all of a sudden one grew purple. An unearthly sound filled the museum. He was laughing. Just at that moment, I felt the cough rise in me. Perhaps it was the time to declare myself anyway. I coughed. Dear sir, what are you doing? And he turned round, drawing himself up to his full height. He was a tall man, with this stark, raven face, black-skinned, fierce-eyed, and he looked at me and said, "Who are you?" And I said, "Nobody matters overmuch, just an interest in oddities, and I have to say, and I do not wish to insult you, you are the oddest thing I have seen, and what are you doing with that ring?" And the man smiled and said, "She's here." And he looked round, and there were 3 mummies in the room. And he went over and read the inscriptions, coming at last to the 3rd one. He said, "Sit and learn." And I watched, and he took out a strange knife, a sacral knife, such as Egyptian priests were thought to use. I had never seen one work before. And with it, he very gently peeled away the mummy face, the bindings, and revealed, perfectly intact, for the first time in 5,000 years, a beautiful female face. And on its forehead, a mark like a discoloration. And then he turned and said, "I have found her, and now whatever you do does not matter." And I said, "What? I have no interest in stopping you as long as you're not doing anything terribly illegal." And he smiled and said, "All right. Would it surprise you if I told you that I was 6,000 years old?" Nothing surprised me, of course, so I said no, and he smiled and said, "I'm sure it does. I was one of the first priests of Ra. How we studied under the gods in those days. How I took the blessing of his light that conjures life into the world, and I blended it with the grain of my land. How as a young man I found that secret that all sages seek. The secret of eternal youth and life. Here I had to cough. Life, yes, youth, no. Oh, he laughed and said, well, I was young for long, but I was not a fool. I did not take the draught once I had done it alone. I gave it to my best friend, and together we journeyed up and down the ancient kingdom all along the Nile, teaching our ways. See, we saw pharaohs come and pharaohs go, and millennia passed. And still we moved up and down the Nile, and few even suspected that we were not as we appeared to be, just travelling priests. Why did I have a man with me? Well, I knew. I knew the pressure of being alone was more than I could bear. After 1,000 years, we found ourselves in the southern kingdom, in Nuba, and it was there I saw her. Oh, Kemet, unbelievably lovely in the flower of her youth she was. Gorgeous, so kind and so good. All summer I wooed her, and she looked at me with eyes of utter love at last. I knew my companion was jealous, but I wasn't sure what he was jealous of. My attentions or her love. But I didn't care. I remember I told her, when the moon is high, I shall make such a potion that our hearts will beat as one for all eternity in life. And she smiled. Well, I went and I gathered my preparations, for you need to know that my elixir is complex to make. It does not make itself. And I was away for a few weeks. Coming back at last, I came into the palace, and it had changed. The brown fever took hold, and as I came in, there was a cry from above. I knew it. It was the mother of my lover, and I ran up, and there she lay, a single brown mark on her once perfect forehead, utterly lovely, even in death. I threw away my potion of eternal life, and I was going to go back to my old wandering life, but my colleague came behind me and said, well, you couldn't save her, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do what you can't do, so that I will be with her in the next life, if not in this. What? I said. I'm going to die. And he put his arms around the dead woman, and he took a draught from a potion. And then he turned to me and said, I found the antidote to that poison that you gave us, this millennia of shadow life, and now I will go to the fields of my forefathers. Farewell. I and your beloved will be as one. And I said, can you not share the secret with me? And he smiled malevolently and said, oh, you could find it if you had the wit, but you do not. And those were his last words. He coiled around her in death, just at that moment, before I could do anything. The priests of Ammon arrived, and they took the body away of my beloved, and they also took, as some sort of willing sacrifice, my colleague, and they were buried together in a tomb out in the desert. I didn't quite know where, but I didn't despair. But just at that moment, the great kingdom in the north waged war upon the south and burnt Kusu from beginning to end. All of Kush, all of Nuba was burnt, and I had to flee north to avoid the war. And when I came back, there was nothing. No record of my love, no knowledge where she was buried, nothing. And in all the years, for through 4 millennia, I have looked for her, and never found her. Until at last, some strange thread I picked up in the Near East led me here, to this old museum. And I said, why, what have you found? And he held up a ring. It was a funeral ring. And I saw in it there was a gem. And in the gem there was a little powder. And the strange man turned to me and said, you see, my colleague put all that was left of his antidote to eternal life in a ring he had put upon his, I suppose, and my beloved's finger. It was buried with her. I found it at last. Now go. And before I knew what was happening, I was out of that little museum. The next day, I heard, although they tried to hush it up, they had found a body in the museum. A strange old wizened man who they had taken on as a porter a week or so before. And he was lain around one of the mummies, as if he was some kind of sacrifice or a witness of its death. Well, there you are. A story that actually happened to me. It's strange, isn't it? Once you start looking for the unknown always finds you.